Over 5 years ago, we bought our first van, which blows my mind that it's been 5 years that we've been in this whole crazy nomad travel bubble of a world.
Where did the time go?
I don't know. It's crazy how fast life flies when you look at it like that and you stand back and you say, 5 years ago, how did that happen? But that's important today because the people we're having on our podcast are the first van lifers we ever met. And that's kind of a big deal because the way our paths crossed, we were randomly camping in a tent at a campground in Oregon, right on the Oregon-Washington border. Kramer was like, I don't know, 5 months old. He was a tiny little puppy.
Super tiny.
We decided we wanted to go camping for the week when we were living in Seattle. And so we headed down to the coast. And one evening we were walking on the beach at this campground and there was a Sprinter van. And we're like, let's just go over and see what it's like. We had seen van life on YouTube at this point and we were curious. And I was kind of like pushing Chris, let's go check it out.
So let's go talk to these strangers. We've never met these guys, but they did have their sliding door open. So it was sort of inviting us in.
Yeah. And so we walked over and they were the nicest people. And their names were Brian and Jen. They're still around. And Brian and Jen, spoiler, are the ones that we are having on the podcast today. But we met them that day standing on a beach in Oregon, and they were the kindest people and answered all of our van questions that we had. I think we ended up pulling the trigger on the van like a month later.
Yeah. And then we started following each other on Instagram and following their journeys. And we do need to say this. Their last name is Danger. And they didn't change it to that. Yeah, it's a super cool last name.
Yeah, I wish my last name were Danger. That's pretty good. But anyway, Brian and Jen, we kind of credit them as, I don't want to say they're mentors, but we've definitely gone to them several times in van life and all these different travel things that we've done and just asked them questions because they are just this wealth of knowledge. They have set themselves up to be able to travel remotely and still have income coming in. I mean, they're like, I feel like kind of like where Chris and I are is where they were maybe like a few years back. Like we look at them, we're like, oh man, they've got it figured out. They can sell across the Pacific Ocean and still make money.
You just gave it away. And that's why we're having them on the
title of the episode.
I know. So we're having them on the podcast because they've graduated from van life. They no longer trek around on four wheels. They trek around the earth in their boat.
On a catamaran.
Yes. And they're currently stuck in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah. So we're going to let them tell you the whole story. But just to kind of fill you in on who they are, they were van lifers, like we said. And then a few years back, they bought a catamaran, decided to hit the water to explore a whole new type of adventure. And then a few months back, it took them to sailing across the Pacific Ocean. Just the two of them, just on their little sailboat. And when they finally made it to land, they got stuck. I'm going to leave it there because they have a good story. It ends well. Just stay tuned. So without further ado, this is our conversation with Brian and Jen Danger.
Dangerz.
The Dangerz. I love that. I love it. I mean, you guys are on a sailboat in the middle of the Pacific. Like, even being able to do this is incredible. I'm so impressed. Oh. Thank you guys so much for doing this with us. We're so excited to talk with you guys. It's been forever since we've seen you in person, but
I mean, there's been like whole oceans between us, so I think there's an excuse a little bit. But yeah, that's amazing. Wait, first, do you have coffee? I mean, it's 8 a.m. where you're at right now.
We get up at like 5. The sunrise is 6, so. We've had coffee, breakfast. We've hung out for a couple hours. I jumped in the ocean. Bry's had a couple work calls.
What a life!
What a life!
Well, it's all about rhythm of the sun, right? Sun and moon.
Yeah.
We also go to bed
crazy.
as soon as sunset happens. So we're basically 90, I think. That's how that works.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're the same way. We've noticed that when we're on the road, like once the sun sets, it's like, what are you going to do? Like, we don't really watch a ton of TV or anything. You're just like, well, go to bed, wake up early. Yeah. It's great until you're in Alaska and you have the midnight sun and you just never sleep. But,
right? Yeah.
Jen and Brian, thank you guys so much for being here with us today. We're going to let you guys just go ahead and introduce yourselves because you can tell everybody who you are better than I can. So just right off the bat, who are you, where are you from, and what are you guys up to?
We are Brian and Jen. We go by the Dangerz. Not really sure why. We didn't fit in very well into normal society, and so some of our friends at some point just started calling us the Dangerz. And a couple years later, we realized that no one knew us by any other name, and so it just kind of became easier. We're originally from Portland, Oregon. At some point, I got really lucky and fell in with the Oregon hippie that moved in next door. and she convinced me eventually to quit our jobs and run away and seek happiness rather than all those other things that society told us we should be chasing. And so we kind of did that. We started building out a van long before that was a thing or had a hashtag or anybody knew about it. I think a negative Chris Farley skit was probably the closest to anybody knowing about living in a van. But we kind of built out an old 67 V-dub on the side of the road after work, which meant probably an hour and a half between, getting home from work and the sun setting and having darkness. And that's when our batteries ran out on our battery powered tools anyway. So it worked. And then we saved up money, downsized, purged all of our belongings, and kind of moved into the van for what we thought was going to be a year on the road. We thought maybe we'd saved enough money to just go find a Mexico beach and exist for about a year. And that was about 12 years ago now.
Wow.
Man,
that's what we said too when we first started out. We're like, we're just going to do it for a year. Like, I think we'll be done after a year. And then, here we are 5 years later, still traveling as much as you can.
I don't know what it is about it. It's just intoxicating to be able to pick up and go wherever you want. Or like each day is a new day. Like you're not, we both like routine, but after a while routine, like being in the house or like going to the same coffee shop and it's this set thing and you start getting used to it. And there's just something about, I don't know, there's just something beautiful about each day being different. Yeah.
I feel like I remember my life better when every day is a little bit different. But all right. So you said you guys lived in a 1967 VW van. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
For the beginning.
I love it.
Yeah, for the beginning. Yeah. That took us all the way down to Panama and back.
Wow.
Somewhere in the middle. Couple years in now, we started to realize that, it was wearing on us. It was a very small vehicle. We weren't prepared for any of this. It
was wearing on you.
It was wearing on me.
It was ideal for me.
Jen can stare at an open and need for nothing.
Yeah.
But our van also broke down every 3 days. And in the beginning, we didn't know how to work on it. It was just, it was both highs and lows and extreme ends of it. And so eventually we found our way back to Portland. Someone mentioned somewhere in that we were supposed to take, like everybody knew that you were supposed to take a break at 8 months if you're doing like a big overlanding trip. Nobody bothered to tell us that, but we also didn't do a lot of research before we left, to be fair. And so, we did that for several years until we came home, thought we would try that on for size again, have the babies, do the things. Didn't work out very well for us. And so we ended up, converting our garage into a home base for us just in case we wanted it. But then during the process, realized we wanted to be on the road again. Right. And so when we did that, we realized that the VW bus was awesome south of the border. It was not so good in the Pacific Northwest. It would rain outside. It would rain inside. So we eventually traded up to a Mercedes Sprinter and started building that out. And that's, I think, when we actually met you guys on that beach way back.
Yeah.
It had a heater. It had 4-wheel drive. It was all weather. We could take it in snow. We could take it up mountains. We could not take our Volkswagen up mountains. It did not want to go up. It only wanted to stay flat or be at ocean, be at sea level. But and it was huge. The three of us at the time, because we had this big, giant, blonde lab, dopey dog that was super happy all the time. We were so comfortable. It was 3 Volkswagens in one van, basically, the size of it.
Luxury at 69 square feet.
Yeah.
Wow. You guys did opposite of us. You started smaller and then went a little bit larger. We started with the biggest Sprinter and then went to the smallest Sprinter.
Yeah. Well, and you're totally right. You guys were the very first van lifers we met in real life.
It was the first van we had ever seen in person. Was your van on that beach that day.
Yeah.
When we moved in our Volkswagen, everybody we talked to thought we were bonkers. Nobody had heard of anyone ever doing this, and we were bonkers. We had really burned out on normal life. And we were like, let's just go camp and be amongst nature and figure out reset and figure out what do we want to do with our lives, because it's not the grind that we have been doing. And it's obvious now that it's perfect for everybody, or not everybody, but
a lot of people.
The freedom of it, and the
Yeah.
you wake up and you're like, what do I want to do today? And am I happy today? And do I have, am I achieving my goals? Am I connecting with nature, connecting with my loved ones? Or, it makes perfect sense now, but at the time we were just trying to escape.
And this was 2008, when we started building out the van. The economy was in the trash can. We had several friends who had lost their job and looking for work. And we're like, oh, what are we doing? Like, we're trying to get out of our jobs. And then 2012 is when we finally drove away after a couple false starts. Horrible time to go to Mexico, cartel violence, everybody's like, oh, you're going to get beheaded twice. It's all the fears, all the possible fears that you could possibly have. We just wrapped up into one transition. Right?
And it was blissful.
It was great.
I mean, there were problems, but it was, and we had to unwind, right? We were like so wired a certain way. We had to reprogram, and we didn't realize that was going to happen. We were doing it while we were acknowledging it and aware of it while it was happening. But efficiency was no longer a critical component of our life, and that had been one of our main driving forces in our jobs and in our daily existence. But when you live in a Volkswagen that breaks down all the time, and you're camping in Mexico, and you're anywhere in Central America, you're not efficient. You're just you're going with the flow. You're like, oh, we broke down. I guess we're going to live here for a couple days until we solve this,
And one of us was really good at that.
It was amazing.
The other, one of us struggled a lot in the early years. To kind of relax and give into it and not know what was coming, right? I mean, I remember at one point, I think we're still in Baja, and I'm like, Jen, what are we going to do? What's the solve? We're running out of money. What are we going to do with our lives? She's like, oh, the universe will provide. We'll have an epiphany. And I'm like, when is the epiphany going to happen? And she just gave me a
Read it now.
Okay, great. I'm going to put that on the calendar. And next year, when it hasn't happened, I'll be able to say, I told you so, and we can go back home. And somehow, before that date ever arrived, there was no epiphany, but it just kind of didn't matter, right? Started to settle in and relax and enjoy and, I don't know, take advantage of the beauty that was, being gone, being nomadic, being free.
So how long did that trip through Central America take you guys? From the moment you left Portland down to Panama and back, how long were you guys gone on that one leg of the trip?
Well, it actually ended up being 2 legs, because we drove down to Costa Rica, and that was probably from Canada to Costa Rica was probably a year and a half. And then we left the van in Costa Rica to fly home because we were missing our loved ones. We were missing playing games with a glass of wine near a fire, things that we just hadn't experienced in the last year and a half on, dreamy beaches and eating tacos. And we kind of got stuck there for a year.
Almost a full year. And that's when we tried to do the tiny home thing. We tried to do the home base, which turned out well for us. I mean, we ended up being able to Airbnb it while we were gone. So it was a nice way for us to come home if and when we ever wanted to, and then helped a little bit, to fund some of the travels and things as we tried to keep going. But yeah, we eventually flew back down, drove back much more rapidly, at least for us.
Brought the Combi back to Oregon, and
then moved on to the next phase, which was the Sprinter, right? And then that we lived in full time for maybe another 6 years.
Well, there's one thing that you're forgetting,
Usually,
which is so we took our house that we had rented while we traveled, and we took the garage and turned it into a studio apartment. So we had a home base in Portland, and then when we went back to get the bus to Costa Rica to drive it back, Airbnb just started. And a neighbor said, you should Airbnb your garage while you're gone. And we're like, well,
what's Airbnb? How does that work?
Yeah. So we did it. And when we got back, we had forgotten to block it for when we get back. So there were Airbnb guests in our garage. And so we're living in our Volkswagen in our neighborhood, waiting for these guests for their reservation to end, right? And meanwhile, they helped buy our plane ticket to get to Costa Rica. Like we don't have jobs at this point, so we're like,
and the money's
to live
gone.
cheap.
We spent the rest of the money on that remodel,
Yeah.
right? And so now we're like, okay.
So then we get back into our garage. The Airbnb guests are gone. We've blocked it. We're safe, and we're like, actually, that was pretty good money. Maybe we should go live in our Volkswagen for another week and let someone else live in the garage. So we started doing that. We started like opening up a month, and somebody would book it for a week, and we'd be like, where do we want to go in our Volkswagen? So we would drive to the beach, or we would drive to the mountains, or we would just go camping for a week, and then we'd come back when the guests left, and we're like, this is pretty great. We just made like $1,000.
I get that.
We totally get that.
We've done that.
Yeah,
That's been us in our van with somebody. Like, we've forgotten to block off our house for ourselves. We've been in town and we pulled them. We're like, oh shoot, somebody's in our house right now.
Yeah,
we've done that.
Yeah, and it was nice. I mean, around here, like we had to stay. It wasn't a whole week. I think it was a couple.
3 days.
3 days. Yeah. So we just kind of bopped around town, and thankfully our co-working space has showers. So we're like, hey, you know what? We'll just go shower at a co-working space. Go back,
Planet Fitness.
I remember we came back, and while we're driving back to our garage, the guests write and say, can we just stay one more night? And we're like, okay. So our friends that lived like 5 blocks away were like, hey, you guys, can we sleep in our Volkswagen outside of your house tonight? Because the guests want to stay and we can have dinner together. We'll cook you dinner or whatever. And it was amazing. We're like sleeping in our detached bedroom outside of our friend's house while we're making $150.
I love it.
It was happening pretty quick, I think. Like we don't know. We thought we were in that phase where we were ready to kind of settle down, I should say. Mm-hmm. And it just, I don't know. It just didn't happen, right? So it was nice to have it. I think I needed it. Like I needed to know I had a foundation or something, some kind of roots. And then as soon as we built it, it was like, oh, well, we don't really need that anymore. And so instead of booking it out for 1 week a month, it quickly became, there'd be 1 week every 3 months that it wasn't booked. And so we'd go say hi to friends and family, and then we'd leave again. And I don't know, somehow it just ended up with us back on the road. And then we kind of did the same thing in BC for a little while because we had lived there before we quit our jobs. Spent time just touring the Northwest. I mean, doing all the things that we never had time to do while we lived there, other than quick backpacking trips maybe. And so we spent another 5 or 6 years just covering every road, paved or non, in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we ended up going to the garage like maybe 2 weeks, and then we'd be gone for like 8 months.
Yeah.
And then we'd be like, oh, let's go back. Our friends are getting married. Let's go back and live in our garage for a week and go to the wedding and do like Portland, and then let's leave again. Like then our home was the Sprinter. The home was no longer the garage. The garage was just our like vacation home when we wanted to vacation in Portland. It was very strange, but it felt right. So
felt great.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one summer in BC where we, just to have a home base again, because we wanted to play volleyball with our friends there occasionally when they had free time on weekends. Day. And so we basically rented a driveway on a house right next to Kitts Beach, which is always in the top 5 best beaches on the planet, multi-million-dollar homes. And we're living in a van, renting a driveway with free internet for like $100 a month.
Composting, internet, water. We're
like, this is our best life, right? I mean, this is
you're loving it
for people that are willing to be nomadic. I mean, don't get me wrong. I also would wake up in the morning and walk down to like the public restroom in the park where the local homeless population or houseless population would be showering in the sink. And so we're all on a first name basis. And at some point you start to question, like, what is the line between van life and homelessness, right? I mean, it's
right.
It's, one of us gets to choose to be doing this and the other one doesn't. I think that's kind of where the line lies. But for us, I mean, we were thrilled, right? And then we kind of would just kind of do that. Like we would spend the winters chasing snow mountain to mountain. We'd spend the summers playing volleyball. And then, events like weddings and fun parties would be the things we would go see friends and family for, as where otherwise we'd go to town and to see them, but then we would sit and not see them because they were too busy, right? Everybody has their own things, right? So we'd get to town and they'd throw us a big party. And we're like, this is great. And then we wouldn't see them for 3 weeks. So I'm like, well, we should probably be traveling if that's the case, right?
We get that. You're hitting on a lot of stuff that, we've had one or two other van lifers on the podcast so far, but I don't think anybody's really talked about the option of being home in your van, like in your hometown, and just sort of, dipping in, getting all the fun, and then piecing back out again. We've done that. We've absolutely done that. And I think it's a really fun way, or it's another positive to, I guess, living nomadically. You can just kind of come back and leave, and most friends understand it. They really do.
Yeah. So I want to go back. Brian, you said something a little bit ago about one of you got it. Like one of you was very comfortable on this nomadic lifestyle, and the other one, I'm assuming you, had a harder time. And was that because you are more like entrepreneur, business driven, like you always had to have tasks, you're like ready to go, like you like, and then, or like why did you have a hard time? And then I know that you had that transition period where you were, like you said, yeah, eventually it'll work out, but do you still struggle with that or have you just completely given your all to just being wherever?
This is a good
We might answer this question differently. I'll warn you. By and large, I've settled in and I've come to at least terms with it. And you're right. I mean, the brain, we have two different brains. Literally, Jen can sit and stare at the ocean all day and have everything she needs. I'm pretty heavily OCD, ADHD. I've got all the alphabet problems going on most of the time. And I think also just background training. I mean, I grew up in a family we both grew up in families that had almost nothing in terms of money. My family really drove home, like, you have to do this. There's only one way in life, right? And this is what success looks like, which is really just having a full-time job, right? And so, yeah, I think I was just terrified of breaking the system. And it took a long time, to realize we spent our 401k. We, luckily got out of debt before we left, other than, real estate. And I just couldn't let it go, right? I couldn't not have a plan or an answer or know what was going to happen when we hit $0. And that part of me still struggles a little bit because obviously, we're now 12 years in without a plan, right? And so our bank account's definitely a roller coaster, as are our emotions from time to time. But we've now had to start over and reinvent ourselves a half dozen times, right? And so we've bounced off the bottom that many times. And at some point, while I still can find myself, starting to get tense or feel the pressure of how do we, what's next? How do we make more money? I also trust that we can do it now, right? Like, we've reinvented enough times that I trust in our ability to do it. And so both, I guess, is the answer, Chris. I mean, it's a hardwiring of society is really hard to overcome, right? And we talk about this all the time. And I got lucky, right? Somebody moved in next door that I fell in love with, and I could just kind of emulate that person's drive for freedom. Most people don't get that. Most people don't get anyone in their life. They're lucky if they have a detached aunt or uncle, right, that drives around or does anything that looks remotely like chasing happiness. And so I feel, indebted to share our story, to try and, find the tallest rock to stand on top of and shout it to the world. Because if I hadn't met her, I'd be dead. I would have died at my desk or in a Hertz rental car for work, right? It's not lost on me at all that was actually the path I was on, and it probably would have happened by now. And so, yeah, we don't have all the answers. We actually have still very few of the answers, but we definitely believe in the process. And we've now spent 12 years living blissfully, happily. Not to say there aren't issues. There's always issues. But, chasing our best life and literally just waking up and deciding where we want to go next and how we want to get there. And it's pretty hard to give up after a while, right? It really is. At some point we started calling ourselves broken, in a good way, but we're broken. We can't go back to that thing that we knew before.
I think that's we're in that place a little bit right now. We have a home base in Tennessee, and we're off the road for a bit during COVID, like a lot of people, but I think we're I think we thought that we were going to be done by 4 or 5 years in. We're like, oh, there's no way we're still going to be doing this in 4 or 5 years, but we still love it. And so it's almost like this little bit of an identity crisis where we really love it, but also we kind of feel like it doesn't quite fit, normal culture a little bit. So we keep going, even though it feels kind of weird on one side, but also what we really love. So I think we're kind of in that place right now.
Yeah.
But I want to ask a little bit about you guys. I know work has changed a lot for you guys. I know one thing you guys do for work, but could you tell us a little bit about how do you guys sustain the lifestyle now? I know that vans are a part of it, but what does that look like for y'all?
So there's like Brian used the word reinvention. There have been a couple different things. Right now, our Sprinter van, Bri designed it in a really beautiful way, and it got some beautiful photography. It got a little bit of press, and people started calling and saying, I want to own your van. Can I buy your van? And fast forward, it turned into a business. So there is some income coming in from a van building business, Zen Vans. Before that, we talked about how we turned our garage into a home base for us. Brian did it in a really beautiful way. So once we did it, and it was floor to ceiling windows and very visible from the street. So this old dilapidated garage all of a sudden became this beautiful little studio loft, and neighbors started coming and saying, wow, like, this is gorgeous. Can you help me design something like this for my dilapidated garage? Or can you help me renovate my attic so it can be for my in-laws or my kid when they get out of college or whatever. So that turned into a little business. It was called Zen Box Design, where Bri was helping people visualize their spaces that they weren't using in their houses and turn them into actual usable living space, like a she shed or a detached bedroom or an actual like apartment in the backyard that they could Airbnb or family could live in, or their adult children could live in, or whatever.
An ADU in Portland, or an accessory dwelling unit, right?
Yeah. So those have been the main like income streams, which are beautiful because they started with Brian's passion, which is design and architecture, I guess, in a way, but more.
Yeah, I mean, there was no plan. There still isn't a plan, and so we learned pretty early on that, one of the key factors in us being able to remove was kind of multiple answers rather than one, right? Yeah. If you're looking for one job or one thing, it's really hard to do that without doing it full time, right? Just due to the nature, again, of how things are built. And so we kind of always have focused on multiple small streams of income, right? And so, renting out our house when we left certainly helped. Dividing that and then having, like, ours was an ADU as well. So our garage being an ADU clearly helped. Nothing enough to do on its own, but all the little ones kind of helped together, right? And then I had committed to Jen, like, we're not going to take jobs for money, right? It was part of the process of detaching and kind of finding ourselves. But somewhere along the way, people kept happening over. Our garage kind of looked like a bar from the street, so people would come in and be like, what are you serving? And then take it to, not unlike opening your van and having people step inside, right?
We did sell for $8 once.
Very good. Yeah. No, we didn't. We traded the offer anyway. So we just kind of ended up in this place where I'm helping people. We had been through the process. We knew the city code. We knew the things that were involved. We knew good contractors. And so at some point, we're basically playing the role of architect, and I'm loving it. And so Jen's like, you're up at 3 a.m. You've been up all night for the last 3 days doing this. Maybe you should actually ask for some money, right? And when we asked for money, it was almost nothing, but at least it helped, right? I mean, it helped feed in a little bit.
Pause, play. It started with friends, neighbors, people that we knew. Yeah. So Bri was happy to do that, and he was getting fed by it himself. So it was really fun for him. But then after that whole phase happened, which was probably several months, then it was friends of friends, and then friends of neighbors, and then people who saw photos that didn't even live in our neighborhood. And so then it was strangers, right? And so Brian's doing it for free for strangers. And that, I was like, I bet you could make $500 doing that.
Yeah.
We got really, I mean, I don't know. One of our place ended up, in the New York Times. We just,
Yeah.
there were also like media events that kind of happened where people came to us, or a YouTuber came to us and said, hey, I know you guys hate being on video, but do you mind if we just do a tour of your house and your van? And then that thing got, 2 million views or something. And we thought it was horrible. We're just like, oh God, what do we do?
We're so weird.
But obviously we then started getting a lot of calls, right? And so, yeah, it was a nice balance of keeping the brain busy, an outlet for design, much less all the years of training I had as an architect but never used, and also helped feed monetarily a little bit, right? And then the van's kind of the same story, much in the same way we met you guys, where, we're on a beach, open the door, suddenly there's a dozen people that want to see the inside of the van. Over time, many of those people kept kind of saying, can you build ours? Can I buy yours? Can you help me? And so as we redesigned ours, just the designer in me kept redesigning our van, time after time. And so eventually we just did it in a way that it was reverse engineered to bolt in and bolt out. So as I wanted to renovate, we didn't have to rip it apart. We could just swap out. And so it also kind of just led into a nice, easy kind of DIY support business, right? We could make the cabinets so that they looked professional and fancy and, nice curved edges so you didn't bang your head on it and things. And so we said no for years. And then finally friends of ours came to us and said, I know you guys don't want to do this, but like, we hate our jobs too. Can you just teach us and we'll do it while you're gone? And obviously that was like, oh, that's an offer we can't refuse, right? It didn't really turn out quite that clean. Nothing does. Like, there was a lot of highs, lows, emotional drama involved. But at some point, it kind of infused this other business that we also kind of ran away from because we're good at that. But eventually came back around and started feeding again small amounts of money back into the travel pool, right, or the lifestyle pool, or whatever you want to call it. So for us, it's not an answer; it's a lot of different answers. We also renovated several homes in the process. We'd go back to Portland and renovate something, and kind of like we did our house. When we got married at one point, we each had a house, and so that worked so well with the first one. We did the same thing the second one, right? We just cut it in half and turned it into 2 units essentially, and so. Again, no easy answer. There's just a lot of answers, and we're still figuring that out as we go.
And I think it's important, if anyone listens to this and is searching for themselves, I think it's important to know that we didn't envision anything. We just literally started living what we love, and ideas started popping up for us, and we grabbed them. But it wasn't like we sat down and had a plan, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to move to this. It's just we went after where our hearts told us to go. And for Brian, design fueled him, and that ended up being a source of money for us. So it's I really believe that you don't have to have the answers. You just have to open yourself up to be able to hear, and things
are flying by.
Things are flying by.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't yet prescribe to the universe will provide scenario. I think we all have a little more control, or at least owedness to that. But I do have to admit, after this many years of doing it, that part of the problem when we were at our jobs is that we were so busy, we were so heads down, we were so exhausted that there wasn't time, energy, passion enough for anything outside of it, right?
Yeah.
Now that we spend most of our time in nature and with freedom, suddenly you notice that opportunities are out there, and you can kind of capitalize on those opportunities, right? I mean, we didn't intend to start any of these businesses, and luckily we didn't bounce off the bottom at the same time that we had to, right? We never had to go think about starting a business or getting another job or anything else. It would happen on the downward curve, but then it would just kind of save us before we got there, right? And again, it's different for everybody. I mean, I happen to get really lit up when I read other people's posts and someone tells them, oh, it must be nice to have a trust fund, right? It's exhausting. But I also remember being that person, right? I remember seeing people that were traveling or sitting on a beach in Baja and looking at a catamaran and being like, oh, that must be the best life. I wish we had that kind of money, or our parents were rich, or whatever it was. And it's just defeatist, right? I mean, at some point, it's an excuse. It's a reason that you don't have to solve it on your own. And I get it. We were there as well. At some point, we just stopped doing that, right? We started meeting those people and asking questions. We're like, hey, can we take you out to dinner? And can you tell us how you did this? We want this, right? And a lot of our, I hate to use the word success, but a lot of the reason we've been able to do this for so long are things we learned from those people, right? Little nuggets of information that those people told us, or hints they gave us. Or, I mean, I remember way back in the day, one of our friends just sat us down and was like, have you read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad? I mean, it changed us, right? Because it changed the way we looked at our home as an investment versus a depreciating asset, or hopeful appreciating asset, but not necessarily. It just changed everything for us, right? And so there have been these little nuggets throughout the way. I mean, there was this very old man on a cliff overlooking a beach in Mexico who we were really struggling, and we're like, how do you know like when to make the leap, or when to run away, or when to run back? And he just kind of like sipped his tequila, and he was like,
in the morning,
if you're young enough to recover, probably like 10 a.m., right? He's like, if you're young enough to recover, always take the leap.
Take the risk.
And
wow,
we just walked away like, wow, this guy just blew our mind, right? Like, this was genius. And then later on, we're like, but how do you know if you're young enough to recover? We go back and find that guy and ask more questions, right?
Yeah.
It's not a straight line for sure, right? I mean, our path is so all over the place, and it continues to be. And we still don't have a solve.
And we are so aware that what it looks like right now is not what it's going to look like in the future. Like, we're grateful and appreciative of the moments we have now, because that's what's happening for us now. But and we don't even foresee what it's going to look like. We just know that cherish what you have when you have it, and be optimistic and hopeful for what's coming in the future, because it's really hard to envision that. But
we're just grateful to still be doing it. I mean, I think we were grateful for that first year, and nothing's changed. Like, we're just so thankful that we're able to keep experiencing these things that, I mean, were lifelong dreams that we just thought weren't accessible, right?
Yeah, and to have choice.
Yeah.
To wake up and say, are we happy what we're doing today? And if aren't, what would make us happy? And should we make change?
Let's go.
Yeah, we're currently happy.
Well, you're in paradise. Well, hang on. Which we need to talk about. That was all. Everything you just said is just like spot on. I'm like, yes, like I get that. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people just miss taking that first step. I mean, buying a van and traveling through the U.S. was our first step. It seemed tangible. It was something that was in our budget. We could afford it, and it's just like little incremental steps. And I feel like taking risks is always scary, but it does get easier, because even if you fail, like, you're right, you'll bounce back. I mean, we've never just fallen so far that, and we've lost jobs, and been through every sort of hurdle, and somehow we're still managing.
Yeah, somehow. Yeah.
So you just got to take that first step, I think.
Somehow we manage, right?
Somehow we manage.
Yeah. So
failure is just a part of the process.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is. And I think, I mean, when it comes to risk, I think people have a certain amount of risk that they're able to take. And that, some people's risk can be greater than what ours is. Like, there's this like barrier to that. But I think the scariest thing is just taking that first step forward and actually doing it, because you just don't know. You don't know. But and
most people, I know you do. I just want to wrap with, to me, we do this all the time, right? I think the problem is that people look at it the way I used to, right? It's a black or white. I go to a job and have a 9-to-5, or I now know that it's an option to run away and live in a van. I think it's a problem, right? I mean, very few people have the means, much less the stress level, capacity for stress to do that. But if you break it down, right? I mean, we try to coach everybody through this all the time. If you break it down to very small steps, if the first step's just paying off debt, part of which might be selling the 5-bedroom house and moving into a 3-bedroom apartment, and then a 2-bedroom apartment, and then a studio apartment, right? I mean, that is scary enough for most people to imagine, much less I'm going to sell my 5-bedroom house and I'm going to move into a van, right? I mean, that is an exceptionally different process, but for most people, that's exactly how they look at it. And I think social media, as much as I love it as a way to touch base and connect with people, it's a disaster for most people, right? They see this thing, they want it, it's black or white, right? I see all these happy people, and then you wonder why so many people move into a van and they're miserable. That's a tough transition for anybody, right? I mean, those of us that have done it know it's not exactly all lovely, perfect times. It is awesome, but you're giving up a lot of creature comforts to do it, right? And I think every decision is kind of the same way. If you can break it down into those small steps, it's crazy how you then find yourself in a completely different spot looking back going, how did I get here? Like, what just happened? How did I end up here? Sorry, Chris. I cut you off. Like,
no, that's so.
No, I'm just
so
agreeing.
Good. You're absolutely right. And touching on the social media side is very important because we do see a lot of people get into van life or any sort of life that involves traveling or nomadicness. And they end up hating it, but
they absolutely hate it. They didn't take the time, and they don't want to admit that they hate it. You know, it's like it's a point of pride. Like if I admit that I hate this, then I failed, and now, what do? I have to go back to my 9 to 5, or but I think that's part of the process, though. Of like, if you don't like a tiny space on wheels, that's okay. Like nobody made the rule that you had to love that.
Yeah, you can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, so
like live on a boat.
And that's where I want to go, because you guys, you just forgoed the whole van thing. You're like, enough with being on the land. We've had enough adventures with firm ground underneath our feet. Let's get on a boat and live on a boat. And my first question is why? Like
how? I want to know how. How did that transition happen?
Before we did it, Chris.
That's
really
that's a really good question. And actually, there was a turning point. I'll let Bri tell you the story. But I also do want to say that we didn't leave van life behind forever. It's still part of us, and we imagine in our future when we're older that we'll be still nomadic in a vehicle. Or a vessel, who knows? I have no idea when, but the van life and the boat life, they're very similar lifestyles. They're traveling, moving, seeing different things, interacting with different people, different cultures.
Lots of time with nature.
Nature, yeah.
Sunrises and sunsets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we always say the only difference, obviously one of them's floating. But really the only difference in lifestyle is in the boating world, it's much higher highs and much lower lows than in the van world. And that's it. I mean, that's really, and maybe some financial issues. It's also more expensive when those lows hit.
There's a lot more safety involved on a floating home because, if you break down on a road in a van, you're not going to sink. I mean, AAA and or someone else will come by. As where we actually have a lot where, if you're sailing between two countries and neither of them is the U.S., you're not even going to call the Coast Guard. I mean, nobody other than another boat happening by. But at least in a van, you're on a road. Someone's going to come by. If you're out in a large enough body of water, that's just not necessarily true, right? And these were things that took a while for us to kind of like, wow, is that how this works? Like, okay. But yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't a clean-cut black and white decision for us. We knew for years that it wasn't just driving down the PanAm and back up. It was every single time we picked a camp spot, it was either on the beach or looking at the ocean from above, right? I mean, that's just how we... Unless we were snowboarding.
Unless we were chasing snow in the wind. That's fair. And so, yeah, like we knew our happy place was always the ocean. And so we spent many, many days over those years staring out at the ocean, looking at boats, being jealous of them, but also knowing we kind of gave that up, right? I mean, even when we had expensive jobs and, we'd pin a boat up on our dream board, like, I don't know how that ever happens in life, right? I don't know how we ever get there because we don't know how to sail it. We don't know how to buy it, all the things. We don't know anyone that's ever owned a boat, right? And so we just kind of always put it off. And we're like, well, I guess we chose this instead, right? But we love our life. We're not going to give it up. Or we'll try to do it later. And then we were driving up through the Yukon Northwest Territories in Alaska. And much like that, midday campfire because it's actually midnight, but you got your sunglasses on.
Yeah.
We met another camper, and he was bitter and miserable. And we're like, man, like, what's going on?
We were
right?
having such a great time. We're like, this is the best lifestyle ever. And I just saw a baby moose and 2 baby cubs with their mama bear. Like, today it was wonderful, it was glorious. A fox ran through our camp. Like, this is the best lifestyle ever. And he is so grumpy. He was grumpy.
He just wasn't happy, right? And we're like, hey man, because this is what we do. Like, we ask a lot of questions, like, what's going on, you know? And he's like, no, I'm not a camper, I'm a sailor. Like, I want to be on a boat. And we're like, well, all due respect, why aren't you on a boat? He's like, yeah, my body's breaking. Like, we're just getting too old to where we can't do it anymore. And we just kind of looked at each other, and we went back to the van later and dove into some quick conversations and just kind of realized it's a hard life. It's not something you can punt until you're old and the body's breaking down. And so we hopped online and we bought a boat 3 days later, sight unseen.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, we were in Alaska with our dog, and we bought a boat in Florida. And we're like, we don't know even how to get to this boat. We weren't there for the survey. I mean, we made a lot of bad decisions I would never recommend, right? But it just hit us how much we wanted it and how important it was to do it while we were young, right? And I think that's equally true with traveling in a van or anything else. But in a boat, it matters more. I mean, it really does. And I have horrible back problems from way back. I mean, it's easy to imagine us not being able to do this for long, especially now that we know how intense it can be. And so, yeah, we basically went back, sold our van, loaded up a rental car, and drove straight to Florida. And somewhere along the way, we looked at each other and we're like, oh my God, what if we get seasick? Or what if the dog gets seasick? Not even getting into how do we learn to sail a boat, right? Just like, what if we physically can't live on it? And so we just decided, like, one new thing a day, right? And we moved on to the boat. It's still tied to a dock. And so the one new thing was trying to figure out how to turn the lights on. And then it was how to flush the toilets. And then it was how to get water to come out of the faucet. And eventually it became, how do you start the motor on the dinghy so that we can get to shore for groceries? And we just kind of kept doing that. And we still have so very much to learn. But, we spent 3 years sailing around the Caribbean, and we just crossed the Pacific. And now we're sitting in French Polynesia again, doing something that we would have thrown a photo onto that dream board, but said there's honestly no way we'll ever get there in our life. Right. And
wow. Yeah.
There's so many gaps in the middle I'm not even able to fill in for you. Right. But again, so very grateful to experience it for whatever period of time we can experience it.
I didn't realize the turnaround for you guys buying the boat was so fast. And I didn't know you didn't have any background in sailing or boating or anything. So how long did it take you from the time you showed up in Florida and you got the keys? I don't know if there's keys to a boat, but you got the keys to the boat. Yeah. How long did it take you guys till you finally, how long did it take you to finally hit the open water? Like, how long did it take you to learn to sail? Did you guys take lessons, or what was that like?
We did not.
We should really preface here that you should not do this the way we did this, probably. I mean, we've now met other people that have done it. It's not to say you can't, but there are probably far easier, safer, less stressful ways than the way we did it. Yeah. But we didn't want to keep paying for a dock. It was really expensive in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so when we bought it, we had it through the end of the month that the previous owner had it. And so we just left that and knew we had to pull away within weeks. And so, again, our one new thing a day, we finally started up the dinghy, felt like real boaters. And then, got terrified and we're like, okay, we should probably start the engines to the boat. That was one day. And they're like, well, okay, now maybe we should leave the dock, right? And the whole plan was just to go to the end of the dock, turn around and come back and put it back on the dock. And once we got free of the dock and got out there, we're like, I don't want to go back. Do you want to go back? We're like, that's horrible. That's terrifying. So we actually just kind of kept going and got to the ocean and then just sat there, right? Like there was nothing to hit. So we're like, okay. And then we put up binoculars and started looking at the lines. We now know they're supposed to be called lines, right? Like we're looking at the strings that go to the top of the boat. And we're like, I wonder which one you pull to raise the sail. And literally put the sails up and the boat didn't go anywhere. And we're like, uh-oh, this is going to be harder than I thought, right? And so we just kind of kept doing that. So we took a couple weekend trips down to the Keys, but then within a couple weeks, we basically sought out and crossed over to the Bahamas.
Yeah,
and then
it was
kept going.
just over 1 month from the moment we pulled up to the marina and we're like, where's our boat? Oh my gosh, that's our boat. From when we crossed the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas was just a little over 1 month.
And we've been sailing ever since. So, and again, at some point, terrifying, right? But then also just small things to learn that we're still learning.
I love that. I'm going to go ahead and guess that, Jen, you like the thrill of the risk and the new challenge. Is that something? Are you like that?
Well, I think if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would say yes. I worked for outdoor brands when I had jobs, and I was around a lot of adrenaline junkies, and I was never high on the list of adrenaline junkies. Like, everyone around me was way more like crazy and wild than I was, but I was around it a lot, so it felt comfortable. I jumped out of an airplane once, and I'll try anything once, but now I really like comfort, and I really like calm, and I really like peace. We live amongst nature, and like right now there's no wind, and we're just sitting, and it's beautiful, and there's no waves except for when that boat went by and we had a little bit of wake, but it's gorgeous. And in like 2 or 3 days, it's going to be 25 knots, and the seas are going to build to 10 feet, and like so we have the whole spectrum of it, and we need wind to sail, and so I appreciate that, but I don't need too much crazy. I don't need to take too many risks. I like to be mellow. Again, I do yoga every single day.
Higher highs.
Okay. Yeah.
And you guys know, like you've been tracking us. Like, we just went through a pretty big low due to an unforecast storm, right? Out here, you start not wanting adrenaline, right? You really start hoping for those calm times, because you're at a different level of risk when things go very wrong, right? And so Jen's the captain of the boat. She's amazing at it. It fits her brain really well. She does all the weather routing. I mean, it's amazing the number of things you have to learn just to do this at a very bare minimum of safety in terms of understanding weather and storms and how things happen. But when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And luckily, my brain does that pretty well, right? And so day-to-day captain work, Jen is exceptional at. And then when things freak out, the alphabet actually kind of helps, right? And so but it's all teamwork. I mean, you can't make this boat move alone, much less do anything in a critical, important period when, a squall picks up and, winds triple or whatever it happens to be. So I don't know. I think a lot of the things we learned early on in the van, in the other travels, like they helped a lot. And we now still see the same thing you mentioned earlier. Like, we see a lot of people who, especially in the Caribbean, because that's the first bouncing off point from the U.S., right? But tons of people that it was their lifelong dream, waiting until they're 65, sell the house, sell everything, kids are gone, I'm going to buy a boat and sail. That's a tough transition, man. That is a tough black and white from I've lived in this house forever with my family and friends in a cul-de-sac to I'm going to go do this. And so we met a lot of people who get as far as the Bahamas, maybe they get a little further, and they hate it, right? They're going to turn around, sell the boat, and have to go buy another house. And they just put everything into that boat, right? And so, I don't know, we feel like, the problem a lot of them face, even if they do get along and don't yell at each other and have those problems, most of these people haven't lived in a small space with their significant other for very long, much less without going away for 8 to 10 hours a day, right? And so now we're all trapped in this small space, and we love it. We're like, oh man, I can't get enough hours in the day. And our boat's 4 times larger than what we had in the van, so it feels great. Like, we're in the lap of luxury, and they're feeling like they just condensed all of this stuff, as well as adding stress, as well as all those other things.
If Bry's down in a hole and I'm up in the salon, I sometimes can't hear what he's saying, and that's weird because for the last 12 years, even longer, because we lived in studio apartments before we quit our jobs, bachelor pads or whatever. he was never out of ear reach, but now for the
Right.
on this boat, I sometimes can't hear him. It's very strange to do.
That is weird.
We have a bit of separation anxiety, is what she's saying. We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're talking to people about it. Yeah.
Well, you guys gave us our first piece of like marriage advice. You said that noise canceling headphones were marriage savers.
Yes.
And yep.
I think we've quoted you guys a few times about that. We're like, that was the first piece of van life advice we got from someone was the headphones were going to save our marriage in a van. And you guys are not wrong. Those things have saved our marriage.
Oh man, it's so true.
Well, that's probably more necessary after we, I think, at least had a part in talking you into moving into a van. So it's good to at least have some other advice to go with that, right? Like, you can't say one without the other.
Yep. We can both be doing our own thing. We're in our own little worlds, but sitting right next to each other still. It's perfect. We can do it.
So what happened? Like what was this the worst thing that happened on the boat? Like while you're stuck in French Polynesia?
Wait, can we, before we ask them about the story of what happened, because I have an idea of what happened. I know a little bit of it, but how long did it take you guys to get across the ocean and what was the route? Can you tell us like what the last few months has looked like for you guys?
Yeah. So in February, we found ourselves in Panama on the Caribbean side after spending 4 years in the Caribbean, 4.5 years sailing the Caribbean. And in February, we went through the Panama Canal and found ourselves on the Pacific side and waited for a weather window and for some paperwork to get a long stay visa to French Polynesia. As an American, you can only stay 90 days unless you go through this visa process. And we knew we wanted to stay a year or two. So then in March, it was actually mid-March, we left Panama and sailed 30 days across the Pacific Ocean. There was one opportunity to stop, which would have been the Galapagos Islands, but that was the only island with any possibility of stopping before getting to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia. We didn't stop in the Galapagos. We just kept going. It took us exactly 30 days. And it was pretty awesome. We had a really great weather window. We had a week with 2 light of winds, which was it can be stressful because you have limited diesel, and so you're either floating or the current's taking you back to Panama, or you're slowly motoring, trying not to burn through your diesel to make some positive ground. And then we had 3 weeks of awesome winds, a few scary squall and lightning storms, but nothing significant broke, which is always a big fear. If something breaks, you have to just figure out a way to fix it or keep going.
And look, we were pretty terrified to do this. I mean, to be fair, it's not, none of our story is about not being afraid to do things. It's about figuring out a way to do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so this was pretty intimidating for us, especially as fairly rookie sailors. Certainly, I mean, the longest we had ever been offshore was
4.5 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
So 30 is significant, right? Much less crossing an ocean.
Yeah.
And so, we did all the work, we did the research, we made the boat safe, all of those things. And then, I don't know, I think we were shocked that we got out there and loved it. I mean, I actually was like, maybe we should just keep going past French Polynesia. This is really great. I get you all to myself, like this is awesome.
I was like, no, I want my anchor in the ground, and I want to just not sail for a couple of days and just sleep and drink cocktails. And
then we got here and we were like, oh, that was significant, right? That's a big thing. Like, less people cross an ocean than climb Everest every year by far. And so there were also a lot of pretty bad stories this year. I mean, there were multiple boats that got hit by whales and sunk within 15 minutes. There were people lost at sea.
People were okay.
Yeah, people were okay. Boats sunk.
Yeah, the people were.
There were other boats that were, they just found a guy the other day that was adrift for 3 months right before somebody found him. Again, there's no road. AAA is not just going to come by, right? And so it was crazy to be out there in the middle of the ocean and hear these stories is daunting, to say the least. And so we got here and we're just like, oh man, that was great. We have nothing to worry about now. And then, within a matter of a couple of days, got hit by lightning, or near hit by lightning that fried all of our electronics, and then still made it here to this atoll, thought we were safe. And then an unforecast, what they call a cyclonic event. So it wasn't a full cyclone, wasn't on the forecast at all. It just developed over top of us and went from, 5 miles an hour of wind to 65 miles an hour of wind just like that, and it was blowing us onshore. And so between the wind and the waves that picked up across the atoll, we basically halfway through were like, okay, we're gonna lose the boat. Like we're gonna sleep on this beach, but we're gonna be fine, right? And then we're gonna rebuild. And somehow we did not lose the boat. We were able to save the boat, but we did have large sail drive, which is what runs the props, so kind of transmission destruction. And so we've been here. Took us 69 days to get the parts we needed to put it back together. And so now, luckily, that was 2 days ago. So now we can talk to you, and this is all great, right? Because we're moving again, we have power again. But it was an interesting, experience, not only to be, no electronics and no propulsion, but in one of the most remote places on the planet, right? And so, luckily we still had a lot of food reserves from crossing the Pacific. Even the Marquesas where we landed, like there were no vegetables and groceries, and there was some fruit. We got some pamplemousse and stuff, but there just wasn't much. And so we supplanted with crab and coconut from the little island next to us, and it was great.
And we have a water maker, so we can make water from the salt water. I mean, most live aboard boats do have that, especially ones that want to go remote.
I mean, we make our own water, we make our own power. We were fortunate to already have a lot of boxes and bins full of food, and obviously occasionally another boat would come by and bring us a bag with a couple more pamplemousse or a bag of flour, which was amazing. So yeah, I mean,
I can't imagine.
The lows are significantly lower is the point, right?
Oh my gosh.
But again, any other day, I mean, we probably spent most of our life saying that our goal was to be stranded on a desert island in the middle of the Pacific.
And you've done it now.
Be careful what you ask for, right?
It doesn't live up to the hype.
Yes and no. I mean, it was great, right? If you didn't allow yourself to get stressed out and worried about another storm coming through, now we have no way to protect ourselves. What happens if the repairs don't work? If we can keep those things in check, then it's pretty easy to look out and be like, wow, I'm sitting in paradise right now, right? But it's also easy to wake up and have it kind of spiral the other way. So I think overall we did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Right?
When we were in Panama before we crossed, obviously we met a lot of people that were also planning a weather window and planning to cross as well. And so we made some friendships. And so then fast forward, we're here, we're stuck because we can't move our boat and our electronics aren't working. And so we're problem solving all of that, trying to get things from globally to get flown into this little tiny island that we're in that has, I think there's 10 houses on
but
this
luckily
island,
a little airstrip with them.
but a little airstrip. Yeah.
Oh,
And-
I was going to ask how that worked.
And our friends come in and they stay for 3 or 4 days, and then there's a weather window for them to keep going. And as they're leaving, they're like, we feel like we're abandoning you because you can't go anywhere, and we can. And we're like, it's cool. We'll leave at some point. We just don't know when. It's very strange. We went from, oh shit, what are we going to do, to, okay, now we have a plan. Let's execute the plan. Okay, what if the plan doesn't work? Wait, nope, let's be optimistic. And then we execute the plan, and the plan worked. The repairs fixed the problem so far. We've done, 2 tests, and we're feeling pretty optimistic. And now we're on the other side where we're like, that was really pretty stressful, but we powered through it, and we did it together, and we feel pretty awesome.
And let's be clear, we don't have any mechanical skills at all, right? I mean, obviously, I
ask.
slowly learned to put an old V-dub back together, but that was a pretty specific set of needs, and we had a book that literally told me what to do, right? This is different, right? Like we had to use our boom as a hoist to lift the engine and push it back just to get to the sail drive. And so then we're like trying to push the engine back forward, and we're like, this isn't working. Like, what are we going to do? Like, we don't have anybody else. There's no more hands. There's no mechanic to call. Anyway, it's just, it's been an interesting experience in how, I don't know. I mean, at some point, disasters are going to happen, right? To all of us at any given point. point. There are different levels of disasters, to be fair, but how we react to them is really important, right? And so whether you can wake up in the morning and have a positive spin on it, or whether you're going to wake up in the morning and just allow yourself to spiral downward is huge, right? And luckily, I don't think we had any days where we both were on the downward at the same time, right? And so it's really nice to to find the balance and have the other person kind of help pull you out of it, right? And look at the good side, or go snorkel, do something beautiful to take your mind off of it, right?
Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine being stuck in paradise for 69 days.
I know.
I want to ask, like, okay, what's the plan? Like, you guys just got the boat fixed. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. Am I jumping ahead?
No, go ahead, ask the question.
All right. You guys,
is there a plan here? I don't.
Did you say?
Is that an okay question?
Unless you expect us to have a plan.
Yeah.
Okay, loose. You guys put the sails up. Is it tomorrow? You guys are gonna start sailing. You put the sails up, and the wind is right, and you head off. Where do you think you're gonna end up, or where are some places you would love to possibly see by boat in the next year? Do you have any idea at all?
We're currently in the Tuamotus, which is an archipelago within French Polynesia. There's actually 5 different, I think, archipelagos within French Polynesia. So our visa is good for a year. We can re-up it for 2. These islands, which are basically just, when you see that idyllic photo of kind of an ocean with little islands in a circle or an oval with a lagoon in the middle, the Tuamotus is just that. There are no major islands. It's just these little atolls. And so this is kind of our perfection. This is our jam, right? Our jam. And so our goal is to stay as long as we can, just hopping from atoll to atoll. We fully like to be in remote places. Like, we love to be on our own, not have other boats around. That's also our jam. We just didn't realize it was going to happen for quite that long, or without having more control over it, right? I think at some point it all comes down to control. Like, if you know you can go somewhere, it's a different ballgame than just feeling like you're at the mercy of nature, right? And so we'll hop from here, possibly Friday. Maybe we need a few more days. That is tomorrow now. Sorry. We'll probably just hop like 1 or 2 atolls over. So that's probably a day. Most of them are a couple of days sail apart from each other. And then we want to go from, say, the Tuamotus to the Society Islands, which is, Tahiti, Bora Bora, names but also a lot more touristy, meaning we'll go there, but we won't want to stay very long. That'll be another week or 2 sail, right, to get from one to the other. And so that's a large difference compared to the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, everything is a day or 2 apart from each other. Here, maybe you can get to a little island within an archipelago, but you got a pretty big sail to get to the next set of islands.
So we're really on a schedule too with Mother Nature, because there are, in the Caribbean, it's hurricanes. Over here, it's cyclones. They're the same thing. They're just
going the other way.
But there's a season for it, and so right now it is not the cyclone season. So we're free to move around anywhere we want, with relatively low risk. Although we experienced an anomaly to that weather pattern a couple months ago, but that. Even the weather routers and the forecasters are like, we didn't see it coming. We don't expect it again, but Mother Nature is chaos sometimes. And,
does what she wants.
But then the cyclone season, we have to be in certain areas that are safer than others, just to keep ourselves at that low risk. And
to keep insurance. Our insurance kind of sets the schedule on where we can go. Right.
Yeah. But we plan, we think, of course we call it an unplan always, because, plans are just a direction you head, and then you change it as you're moving. But we plan to be in French Polynesia for a year or 2, and then just keep heading with the winds. We'll keep heading west, and there's the Cook Islands, there's
Fiji, Tonga.
New Zealand,
all the places
Australia.
that we might have wanted to go for a honeymoon back in the day, but couldn't afford, right?
Right.
Now we get to go to and live for $0, right? That's the way that it's very much like the van, right? Is once you show up somewhere, we're literally just spending money on the food we get at the grocery store.
And
everything else is free.
And fixing
And parts, obviously, that's
right. I can't imagine that was cheap.
Right. So yeah, I mean, our long-term goal is to end up in New Zealand or Australia eventually, but we would love to stretch that out to a 7 or 8 year plan, right? If we can just slowly island hop our way there.
And we do dream about driving New Zealand, both islands, and driving Australia, and so don't know what that looks like, but
that's probably where the lifestyles merge again for us, right? I mean, we're obviously not going to drive around one of these islands, other than a day rental or something.
There are no
right.
But yeah, when we get to those islands, then because of the seasonality of what we can and can't do on a boat, then it's highly likely that's where we'll either build out another van or ship a van over, depending on what we can figure out, and then kind of spend seasons, half on the boat, half on the van, at least for a couple years, until we see what comes after that, I guess.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
That is so cool. I can't even wrap my mind around sailing to New Zealand or Australia. Like, I don't know. I'm ready to go buy a boat right now.
We actually should not be talking to you. We got to cut the communication off right now. So
you love being bad influences.
You are the worst influences.
First and see how you like it, right?
Yeah.
I know nothing about sailing. Neither of us grew up around boats at all.
No.
We have a kayak now. And that's
we have
about
a kayak. So when you were in the middle of nowhere, I mean literally nowhere, there's just ocean, and then it's both of you, for 30 days. And then you finally see land. Like, were you excited to see another human face, or were you just like, oh, I don't really want to talk right now? Like, I
bet we have different answers.
Yeah, I have actually become more reclusive over the years as we do this. And, I have some social anxieties we can talk about in another setting. And so I'm always the guy that's in the party, like trying to find a corner and like one person to talk to, right? I don't need a lot of human interaction. Jen, I think would love to see someone other than me for a while, right?
I love talking to strangers. I love hearing people's stories. That's why I love your guys' podcast so much, is because, you're just sharing people's stories with the world. It's very cool. But I mean, I walk into a crowd and I just know that everybody has a complex, history, a complex current life, that, they've had heartache and they've experienced love and joy and pain. And I just know I can just feel that everybody has these just layers and layers and layers of their life. And of course, I don't want to be a weirdo and say, tell me all the layers of your life, but I really do want to know. I've learned to not be so invasive, I guess is the word.
It's really funny. I mean, we do love these conversations, right? Especially when it comes to other travelers, which here, that's all we get, right? All we talk to is other people that are traveling or locals, which the language divide here is becoming a little problem with that, right? So it's really more just about other travelers. And we love sharing our story. We love trying to help other people do it. I mean, you guys know this firsthand, right? From that day on the beach. But we also hate being on video, right? I mean, there's a reason we don't have a YouTube channel. We haven't done those things. We're just not comfortable with it very much. But if somebody just snuck up with a camera as we're talking to other people, that's great. It works. I think we were stoked to see land. As for people, we have a slightly different answer, right? But it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's to tie this back, I guess, to that whole black and white thing we were talking about. When we lived in Portland and we had our jobs and we dreamt of or put the pictures up on the board of these things that we wanted to do but knew we could never do, we didn't know anybody that had ever done it. We didn't know how to get there. We didn't even know about that first step to try and turn it into a gray zone, right? It just seemed impossible. There's just this giant wall that said, that's not life. That's not how you do it. Keep your 9 to 5 and work your tail off. Now, ironically, the only people we talk to are people that live this lifestyle, right? The only people we talk to are people that have run away. Some of them obviously worked and saved and waited till retirement. But we meet a crazy number of people that are far younger than us. We're kind of in the middle zone between the retirement people and the young crowd, whether YouTubing or not, right? And so every conversation we have now is about various ways to get free, various ways to make money. They're oddly much like this, right? It's just that no one happens to be filming them or recording it. And it's just, my brain can't not laugh in the middle of each one of those conversations and be like, where was this 15 years ago when we were looking for any impetus whatsoever? Like, where was that voice to say, sure, it's possible. Go to this marina and talk to 25 people tomorrow about 25 different ways to do it, right? It's just not. And even, frankly, even if somebody told me that, my brain would have been, no, it's not. No, that's not true. And it's not that easy, but all of these people are out there, right? And I think everybody's just happy to share the story, right? I mean, I presume most people you guys contact and say, do you want to do a podcast? They're like, no, that sounds horrible. Like, people love sharing their story and ideas, and they want to help other people.
Yeah.
You don't know how to act. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is the problem too. When we needed it, there was no podcast and no YouTube and no social media because we left too early, maybe. But I don't know. It's really interesting, the difference in the kind of people we talk to now, and we could have used them.
Yeah, it's definitely more common. I mean, even since we got into it 5 years ago, when we first started and we bought our first van and we were in Chattanooga converting it, I think we saw maybe one or two other vans the entire time we were converting this van in Chattanooga. And now you can't drive a mile down the road without seeing another van. It's just like, at first everybody wanted to see inside, and now it's just like, okay, another van. Like,
now
there's
people
like
just roll their eyes at
conversion
us.
companies. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, like, and I personally, I love that because there are more people to learn from. I mean, you guys have been so helpful to us in so many seasons. I don't know how many times I've sent you guys messages about random things and you guys answer immediately and have been great. But I mean, there's so many people out there who are so willing to share their knowledge in whatever arena they're in. And yeah, it makes it seem more accessible, like a little less scary to kind of jump into it because other people have gone before us.
Yeah. It's nice to know that you're not alone.
I know we need to wrap this up because we've held you guys for a long time.
I mean, we can do this all day, but then you're going to have to do a whole lot. So,
I'm afraid if we stay on here too long, I'm going to go out and buy a boat too because I'm like ready to go.
She's gonna try to sell the house and So if you could leave us with one like lasting thought, if somebody's listening to this podcast right now and they're like, you know what, boat life doesn't sound half bad, being in paradise for 2 years or whatever. I mean, what do you want to leave us with?
What has really brought a lot of freedom to our decision making in our life is to know that when you make a decision, you're not making your forever decision. So if you're like, what do I want to do for the next year? I really want to live in a van for the next year. You're not saying I'm never going to go back to normal life. I'm never going to go back to a job. I'm just going to do this forever. It's a little bit easier to swallow if you're just choosing a right now decision and not a forever decision. So what do you have to add?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think
that's good.
That's kind of the key takeaway for us, right? Like, it's all about the gray zone. It's all about breaking it down to smaller decisions, right? It's not about the end of the race. It's literally like, what's the next step look like? Where am I going next? And somehow, at least for the brain that we talked about before, that was really stressed about all of these things, it just makes it a lot easier, right? I mean, I think that the fact that we planned on only leaving for a year is actually the only reason we're still doing it 12 years later, and no plans to stop. Let's be clear. I think if we had tried to say, we're going to go do this thing for 12 years, we never would have gone, right? I mean, we wouldn't have known how to solve all the things that presumably had to be solved, much less find the courage to do it. So, yeah. And then the other best advice is go find yourself a Jen. Like that's certainly very helpful, right?
Everyone needs a Jen.
I mean, I say it jokingly, but it's actually important, right? I don't mean that even as a partner to do it with, but you are, I mean, there's some study that came out a while back, like the number one, I'm going to slaughter what this study said, but effectively the number one key piece of importance is the 5 people you spend most time with, right? And so for most of us, if you spend your time around people that also feel like there's no option and the only path is to stay at the 9 to 5, it's very unlikely you're going to find a path out, right? As where if you start spending time with people, sailors, people that live in a van, listening to podcasts, I mean, it starts to sound easier. And at some point, that's all it takes, right?
It's so true. That's really good advice. It really is good. I mean, I'm sitting here like, oh yeah, I remember that the second we started watching YouTube of van lifers and met you guys, and I realized it wasn't just us. Like, it seemed more accessible. It seemed doable in those little segments of, we'll do it for a year, we'll do it for another year, and just, it is much easier to swallow. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much.
One. Is it okay if I
go for it? Yes.
Oh yeah,
please,
absolutely.
Please. We're not going anywhere. This is great. Let's go.
We live in a world right now where there's so many visuals. We're seeing how other people are living, and I guess it seems to me like the answers are inside us. What is going to make us feel like we're really living true to ourselves? When we see what other people are doing, that's inspiration. That's just information to add to what you're already, feeling. But there is no right way to live. Like, van life is not right, boat life is not right. It's what feels right to yourself. And so developing that is hard, especially when you live in a fast-paced life. You've got the kids and the job, and you've got conflict in your relationships that you're constantly trying to like find harmony, and you're trying to take care of yourself, and you work, it's very loud. And so it's hard to hear that. But that's where, like, and we see people, they move into a van, they hate it. They buy a boat, then they decide to sell it. Like, that's not failure. That's them learning what they really want, and that wasn't it at that moment. And so that's just, it takes courage, and it takes quiet to try it on for size. To try it on for size, yeah.
That's so good. That's really good. Yeah. It's okay to say no. I mean, I think we've pulled from a lot of different we've watched so many people on YouTube and heard so many podcasts, and we've pulled a little bit of information from so many people and figured out what works for us and what doesn't, and we're still figuring that out. Who knows where we'll be? Maybe we'll be on a boat next year. I have no idea.
Yeah, and then you've got the dynamic of the two of you, right? So it's not just, Chris and Sarah, it's the Chrisera.
Yeah. Guys, this is so much fun.
Yeah, we need to do this again.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you guys doing this with us.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to What No One Tells You with Chris and Sarah. If you have a comment or question that you want answered on the air, be sure to send us a message to hello@chrisandsarah.com, or you can call or text our phone number at 423-825-9572. Thanks for listening.